Hello, everyone, and welcome to our October Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition webinar. Today we have Father Stan Bosch is a Trinitarian priest, a member of the Trinitarian Order. He's a pastor and a clinical psychologist. He's the pastor of St. Raphael Church in LA, and he's ministered to Los Angeles gang-involved youth for 20 years. And he's going to be speaking to us today about trauma-informed care. Everyone we meet in prison has been traumatized, if not by the experience of being incarcerated, probably before they got their other things that may have led to that. So I'll be monitoring the chat room and the question and answers. If you have anything that you would like to bring up during the webinar, during this talk, please write in the chat feature and I'll bring it to Father Stan's attention. So good morning, Father Stan, welcome.
Morning, Father George. It's an honor to be with you. To all of you around the country, I'm very grateful for your mission and your work. I think we have a lot in common. Shall we begin, Father George?
Yes, please.
As you're logging on, we take a moment just to come to our breath. As Paul calls us, temples of the Spirit, our very breath, our ruach, is the presence of Jesus inside of us. As we breathe out life and nourish the plants and the trees, we breathe in the oxygen from those that interchange of gifts. Lord, we thank you for the interchange of gifts that you've offered us for those that are incarcerated. The gift of our lives, the gift of our mission, the gift of men and women and boys and girls that are in very difficult and sometimes desperate situations. We pray that we continue to be nourished by your love and one another, that we be instruments of healing, building bridges between broken hearts. And we thank you and we praise you as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, our God forever and ever. Amen. Welcome, brothers and sisters. I'm honored again to be with you. I'd like to share some images with you this morning, and I want to go very quickly, but Father George and Karen have promised that we'll get you a copy of this presentation very soon after. I'd like to start with images and metaphors that, Richard Rohr and others really believe that it's images that transform, as Jesus used parables. He didn't use concepts, and so images can transform us also. I believe at the heart of what we do, I believe is that first encounter between John Paul II and the Dalai Lama. Evidently, protocol called for their first 1 hour of encounter to be spent in silence, exchanging benevolent glances. Can you imagine looking the Dalai Lama, John Paul II, exchanging benevolent glances with those two for an hour in silence? And yet the image that I project onto you is I believe that's what you do with jail and prison and residents and those that are coming out in re-entry. Is simply without words is to exchange benevolent glances in life and of love as Jesus does with us, we do with one another. This was the title of the article that was written about that first encounter. I wonder if it doesn't apply to all of us. So a methodology for healing and a healing alliance, I really adopt this Socratic method, and it's part psychodynamic or therapeutic, clinical, but it simply is also the heart of what I believe in awakening faith in one another. If you remember the Socratic method, Socrates had this methodology not of teaching from the top down, but rather circular questioning. That the assumption for Socrates, and I believe an assumption that I bring to this service and to this mission, is not so much circular questioning, but rather the assumption that the answer is inside of another, the answer to their own healing. That for us simply to listen and exchange benevolent glances, I think it's the greatest gift that we give to one another. There's a story of a man who lived a long life, and as he went to the gates of paradise, the angel of the Lord came out and said, well, let me show you around paradise for a little bit. You can make a final and appropriate decision. And the man said, no, I don't want to make any more decisions. I've been making them all my life. I want to be here. I want to be with God forever. And she said, shut up and watch. So perhaps for the first time in his life, he shut his mouth and he opened his eyes. And he started to see things he had never seen before. To one side of paradise, there were these beautiful mountains with snow on the top and skiers rushing down the side. To the other side of paradise were these beautiful rippling cascades of mountain water with fish jumping and dancing for joy. And on the backside of paradise, there were these little children playing soccer in the alley. So the man said, "Oh, angel of God, I do want to be here. I want to be in paradise forever with the Lord." And she said, "This isn't paradise." He said, "If this isn't paradise, where am I?" And she said, "This is the world you lived in all those years but never saw." For that seems like a very optimistic story in the midst of threats of nuclear war, the violence on our streets, the political tensions that we experience, the poverty in the world. But I wonder who created all of that. That here in Los Angeles, we can't see the San Gabriel Mountains for most of the year, but it wasn't God's doing, it's our own contamination. The children have to watch their backs to go across some enemy gang territory in so many of our cities. I don't believe that was the will of a loving God. That I believe as our rivers are being contaminated in our oceans, again, if we could simply see with the eyes of wonder and reverence and awe, that in exchanging benevolent glances with those that we serve, I believe it's the hope. It really is a way of starting to see and then to act in a new and a creative way. William McNamara, in the 1960s, he was a Carmelite monk in Colorado. He wrote a book called The Human Adventure. And in that book, he defines contemplation as taking a long, loving look at the real. Contemplative as in action is what Merton would call us to be. That we take long, loving looks, exchanging benevolent glances with those that we serve inside and outside of our institutions, I believe is the beginning of transformation. We learn this in clinical studies that CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy starts with our perceptions and our stinking thinking sometimes, which creates certain reactions in our body, our emotions, that we live out in action. And so if we could simply reflect on how we see the world, probably many people critique us for what we do. Why would you be going inside? Why would you be spending all your time? That's a good question. And I think our testimony of what we see on the inside of people's hearts and lives can be transforming in our culture and our politics. It really is a psychodynamic approach, which means we look deeper, we go inside. Our challenge, I believe, is to listen to the pain. Alice Miller wrote a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child in the late 1980s. She was probably the first to start to study and to write about infant and childhood sexual abuse. And she has this little phrase in this beautiful book. I really recommend it, The Drama of the Gifted Child. It's very easy and powerful reading. She said, for emotional healing and transformation to happen from those who have been traumatized is based on the need to have a sympathetic witness to their pain. Might that be a job description for all of us, that we're called to be a sympathetic witness to the pain of another? I don't have the answers to the pain that I listen to every day, but simply the witnessing of that pain in the precious gift of another, and taking long, loving looks, exchanging benevolent glances. Even though I don't have the answer to the darkness and the pain, there's something transformative about that encounter. It's about examining not simply the behavior of ourselves and of others, but the pain behind the behavior. As with addiction, fighting not the substance, but the circumstances that lead someone to seek out that self-soothing. So taking long, loving looks at what's not being said, the underside. I guess you know what this is, right? I wish I could interact with you at this point, but most would recognize that it's an iceberg. When I was doing this in North Carolina with some psychologists and some law enforcement people, one lady said that, oh, it looks like a nasal passage under here. Another person said, which I didn't know, that an iceberg is fresh water in the midst of salt water. I didn't even realize that. But this is the image that the first to use it for the psyche, and you know the word psyche literally means soul in Greek, that this was an image that Sigmund Freud used, and then Carl Jung picked up on the image of our soul, of our very being. This is what we're allowed to see. This is what we can show other people. This is what Carl Jung would call the persona, that outward, like I'm a priest, I'm a psychotherapist. It doesn't say anything about who I am in the depths of my being. And this is the reality that's really manifested in so much of my attitudes, my points of view, my emotions, and my behaviors. This is another image from the point of view of Carl Jung, the tip of the iceberg, which would be our conscious awareness. But you know, there's evidence that 95 to 90% of my being, of my psyche, of my soul, is lived in the underneath, what he would call the shadow, which is not something negative, but rather the invitation to integrate all of this into a conscious awareness in the present moment. And as you know, that's what contemplative prayer is about. It is what we call in psychotherapy these days mindfulness, which literally is prayer. You know, across all of the mystical traditions, Christian, Jewish, Sufi, Hindu, Buddhist, Islam, there are similar practices in prayer styles. And it really is the practice of going to the breath and living in the present moment, allowing thoughts to come in and out of my mind like clouds, rather than putting judgments on the thoughts. Oh my God, that's good. Oh my God, that's bad. Well, we've learned that anxiety and depression really is in the erased memory in the cells of our body, but it's also a rush to the future. Oh my God, what's going to happen? What's not going to happen? It's a rush to the past. Why did this happen to me? That if I want to visit the future to plan, to visit the past to heal, but if I live there, I'm already dead. It's the practice of coming back to this present moment and awareness and allowing all of this to emerge in stillness, in silence, and in prayer, which aren't a lot of words, but rather just being present to the beloved. So up here, our thoughts and perceptions, our conscious awareness. Below the surface, the pre-conscious or subconscious that many call it, are the memories and the stored knowledge. This is really where our trauma is stored, which I'm going to define for you in a few moments. We store our fears, our phobias, our feelings, thoughts, urges, memories, the unpleasant and unacceptable feelings of pain, anxiety, and conflict down below. And Jung would call this level the collective unconscious, is what we share as human beings. And if we believe that we belong to the community of the saints, that we belong to one another into eternity and beyond what we can see. So I believe the invitation here is just to listen to what's not being said. Listen to what's deeper than what's happening on the behavioral or the conscious level. What's really going on inside? What is that we do? What is your purpose? Again, I go back to images and metaphors that help me with realizing what is it that I do? Perhaps in a word, simply as Stan, but also as a priest and as a psychotherapist. Part of my purpose is simply to be a part of a creative and a safe and a sacred space for another person to express who they are without having the answer to who they are, without giving them the words. There's a story of an older man that was next to this huge boulder in the middle of a park. And he was just staring at the boulder. A little boy walked by one day. He said, "What are you doing, old man?" And the man said, "You know, I'm contemplating the lion that is incarcerated inside of this marble, and I'm going to liberate it." The little boy went away disgusted, saying, "Oh, there's no lion in that rock. You must be senile." Well, the little boy went away, and he came back about 3 months later. In the place of that piece of molten rock, of that marble, there was the most magnificent sculpture, the most beautiful lion that he could ever imagine. He said, "I didn't realize, sir, you're an artist, that you liberated that lion from being incarcerated." And the old man smiled and he said, yeah, all I had to do was take long, loving looks at its possibility. All I had to do is offer benevolent glances to its possibilities. And then I had the image and it was liberated before my eyes. That's a partial true story about the story of Michelangelo. You know, Michelangelo was called by all of the artists in northern Italy and southern Europe to come to the Academy in Florence, Italy. And there was a blemished pillar in the midst of the Academy. And they were invited simply to create a piece of art out of that blemished pillar. And Michelangelo was simply spending months contemplating its beauty, its possibilities. And then it was so easy, he just chipped away at everything that was keeping it incarcerated. I don't believe that we chip away physically at what keeps people incarcerated, but we chip away in the way that we see the system that incarcerates people, which is a system of racism and bias, which is a system not of justice. I remember when I first heard that language of let's bring them to justice, it was most impacting during the Twin Tower devastation. And Bush started to say, we're going to bring them to justice. Then every president since then, our courts say that, our local police department says this, except for here where they believe they can't arrest themselves out of the problem of gang violence, that we live in a system that is really is a payback system of retribution. And yet biblical justice is about building bridges between broken hearts. Biblical justice, by way of Walter Burkhardt, who was a pastoral theologian, said that biblical justice is fidelity to the demands of a relationship. My brothers and sisters, I believe that you are that fidelity to the demands of a relationship, to be inside and outside with people walking who are hurting and in pain and in trauma, and identifying with our own. You know, I do believe that we are called to this mission and ministry for a reason. And I believe that probably there's some unmet childhood and infancy need inside of us that we bring to this mission. It's what I ask our intervention workers and case managers in Soledad Enrichment Action that I serve with as the director of mental health. What is your unmet childhood and infancy need that you bring to this mission and to this work to have healed? Because we're drawn to it for a reason. And I believe if I'm honest about my own traumas and what I bring from infancy and before, even the historical traumas that many of us have experienced, unconsciously perhaps, that then that holy exchange of gifts becomes a reality. I don't have the answer. I'm in the process of healing and redemption with you. I believe that this is our population's torment. I discovered it in my doctoral work. It's called alexithymia. It's the inability to put words to feelings. We have bodily sensations, but it's not an emotion until I find words for it. So when I start to find words to express my inner states, then I'm more free on the inside. Alexithymia, the inability to put words to feelings. I believe that that's part of our awakening process with those that we serve, is allowing them the space to find the words to the inner, perhaps chaos, to the inner pain, the trauma that they bring to the relationship with us. We act out what we don't talk out. This is a phrase that we use in therapy. And to my experience, has been so helpful that I act out what I don't talk out. So again, providing the opportunity and the space to be able to talk out what's happening on the inside. I don't need a lot of words. I just need the desire to listen. And I believe it's the greatest gift that we give to one another. A very quick example is in group therapy a couple of months ago. I had gang members from different neighborhoods and different cultures in the same room. They would say, you know what, Father Stan, we can't even talk to one another outside of here. But what we're finding is that we're starting to realize that we share a lot of the same feelings on the inside. And it's helping us to be able to have less emotional reactivity. Those are my words, not theirs. But at one point, this young girl came and after the first session, and I always ask at the end, what's a word that represents what you felt during this time? I believe in affect over content. I believe in following the emotions can lead to the depths of one's heart and soul, and to awaken and allow to emerge some of the repressed trauma that's inside of us. So the first day she said, I felt like I was on blast. And then the next week she said, today I was chilling. The next day she said, no, I felt I was tripping. And after about 2 months and asking, what did you feel during this time? She said, today I feel effervescent. I said, where did you get that word? She said, well, now that you're inviting us to find words that are expressing what's happening inside of us, I'm paying attention to literature and to reading and English, and I'm finding all of these words that are expressing what's happening on my insides. My brothers and sisters, I believe that can save lives. Because again, we act out what we don't talk out. All of the violence that I experience on a daily level here in South LA, I believe it's from that repressed anger and hurt and rejection and trauma that gets dumped out on one another. As you know as well as I do, some words that can get you killed are, what are you looking at? Or where are you from? That we are that fragile as human persons that one look, one word, one phrase can get you killed. And I believe where we create these safe and sacred alliances, that it's allowing people to define what's happening inside. And I want to caution us against giving people their words. We have to discover it. Like if somebody's stuttering for their word, maybe we're just planting the seed in that space, in the anxiety of the silence, for them to discover what's happening on their insides. It feels like this for so many of the people that we serve, and perhaps ourselves also. So complex or developmental trauma, real quickly. And Father George, please intervene here if I'm going too slowly or if anybody has any comments. The language of developmental trauma came out of some theorists like Van der Kolk, who was from Amsterdam. What we've learned is that during the Second World War, the language was shell-shocked, like that one experience of trauma. The language started to change in the Vietnam War when the language of shell-shocked really wasn't embracing or embodying the multiplicity of symptoms that are coming out of that war. And that's where the language of PTSD emerged, post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, into the 80s and 90s, we were finding that that kind of language wasn't really enfleshing the experience of trauma from before the womb, the historical trauma that is experienced into the womb, where children are listening, fetuses are listening to screams and beatings and ambulances and gunshots. So this language of developmental trauma, it's now called in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which doctors and therapists use. It's still called complex PTSD. It's experience of multiple traumas, like I can imagine most of our jail and prison residents experience. It's developmentally adverse, meaning what happened from before you were born. There's a large Salvadoran community that I serve here, and the historical trauma from the Civil War in Salvador is in the veins of their bodies, in the erased memory of their cells. Often it's within the person, the youth, or the person's caregiving system. And so many foster youth are so vulnerable to being incarcerated. But I love that there's an emerging consciousness on part of some politicians like out here, the Board of Supervisors, which are moving away from a putative model and really funneling resources into diversion programs where we keep the little ones out of first arrests by giving them a mentor and a case manager. It's rooted in early life experiences, not just as an adult from that shell-shocked or PTSD experience. It's responsible emotional, behavior, cognitive, and meaning-making disturbances. And the key symptoms are dissociation. Different personality emerges. Somebody that's in my office or my group therapy room, like, oh, Father Stan, this was so beautiful. This is so healing. They walk right outside, Huda! And they start reacting. It's a dissociation. We all do it. I'm a personality when I'm celebrating Mass, and I'm very different than at happy hour with friends. But the difference is my dissociation is conscious. And when it's unconscious, it comes out in lots of ways. And again, the invitation here, it can be complex clinically, but simply allowing a person to talk about their experience. The depersonalization is it wasn't me. No, I didn't do it. We see it in the courts and we see it on the street. And there really is the belief that it was not me. From dissociation, I depersonalize it. I wasn't getting loaded on the street. I wasn't using crystal meth. And so we don't want to judge those experiences as we listen to them, but we want to allow people to talk about it. You ever feel like that? Anybody you serve feel like that? It's nothing personal. I don't like anybody. So many people on our streets are in such rage, especially with COVID, now with depression and anxiety. There's such indiscriminate killing here in South LA. As Father Guy, who's with us, knows, there used to be rules, but now it's indiscriminate. And we got to be careful how we drive or the gestures that we put up if somebody frustrates us, because we could get shot in the face. Complex trauma influences the deep layers of ourselves. We act to endanger ourselves. Not only difficulty in controlling urges and emotions, but entire events are removed from memory. We somatize, meaning we take on that repressed emotional energy and experience into our bodies. And we become sick and we become violent. We become dissociated. Trauma is not simply the story of something that happened back then. It's the current imprints of that pain, horror, and fear living inside of us. That's Van der Kolk. I was just with him a couple of weeks ago in a conference, and he's so insightful. If you ever had a chance to look at some of his YouTubes, and again, you're all going to get a copy of this presentation. He also believed and defined trauma as the inability to be present with what is in the here and now. The trauma pulls us out of the here and now into the there and then. It returns us to the repetitive re-experiences or reenactment of the past trauma. Healing trauma requires being present with what is in the moment. That's where our power is, I believe, as servants of Jesus, simply to allow another to express their pain, becoming sympathetic witnesses to their pain. How are we doing, Father George?
We're doing fine.
Can I go another 15 minutes? Or?
Absolutely, yeah.
Already. Now, I know this is a lot, but I also would imagine that you all can identify with this and have been studying and reading to be in classes and courses. For us to renew our licenses to do therapy, we have to have at least 36 hours of continuing education units every 2 years. So I'm really a real advocate for us to study and to learn, because there's so much to discover and it brings insight. But even with a doctorate degree and a few master's degree, my assumption when I'm with somebody is I know nothing. I don't know their pain. I don't know their experience. But the greatest gift that I bring is to listen. It's about creating spaces, allowing another person to talk, to discover their own narration of their memories. What's so important is that we set the frame. This is really big in psychotherapy. It's what is this relationship about? You know, I'm a mandated reporter. I'm in the role of a therapist in my role. But as a priest, I'm a mandated reporter all the time. And so to talk about limits to confidentiality, what is it that I need to disclose to another if you are a harm to yourself or another, if there's child abuse on any level, elderly abuse, adult dependent abuse, that to talk about that I'm here to be a safe place for you, and here's some of the limitations. I do believe that this is so important. The most valuable gift we'll give anyone is the gift of listening. It will reveal the memory of the beginning of any addictive or compulsive symptoms and our people's emotional association with it. The invitation is to explore everything, to be inquisitive. I don't have the answer. And I have to be very, very careful. If I think I'm going to interrupt somebody, now I'll guide them if they're going too quickly. If I'm being lost in the narrative, I might slow them down because we can jump so quickly in our pain. If I'm being lost, my assumption is you're probably lost in your own experience. So can we slow down a little bit? You talked about your dad and then you jumped to your granddad. Let's just explore those areas. To me, this is such a great grace, and it's not work, because all I have to do is listen and explore with another. I'm interested in your experience, in your history, and your point of view. It's the Healing Alliance. You are the sacred space. Gabor Mate is a very well-known today. He's a psychiatrist out of Vancouver, Vancouver, Canada, and he wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. He's a very dry speaker, but he's terribly insightful. He's so bold as to say, and other doctors and scientists and psychiatrists are agreeing with him today, and I certainly agree, that all addiction is rooted in early childhood loss and trauma. And for me, slowly but surely to explore at the pace that another person wants to go. You know, one insightful intervention that I've learned is not to start from the beginning. If somebody says, Father Stan, where do I begin? I do this in therapy, in confession, and also just in an interchange. I don't know where to begin. Well, what if we begin with the present moment? How are you feeling right now? How are you feeling about your life? And I guarantee us that people will jump quickly to what's disturbing them in the present. And we want to explore that. What's the pain behind the addictive behaviors? What are the circumstances leading to self-soothing through substances? That we have a terrible, deep need to bond with one another. And if I can't bond with another human being, I'm going to bond with a syringe needle or crack cocaine or crystal meth or a bottle of liquor. It's also avoidance of pain, attempt to self-medicate emotional pain. There's no integration of the pain with the joy. And yet the heart of our mystery is Jesus on the cross, that in the middle of that suffering, there can be new life emerging if we trust that somebody is accompanying us into the other side. This was a presentation that I was a part of not too long ago. It was called Connection is the Opposite of Addiction. And that's what I believe that you and I have to offer. I want to be honest, I'm not always here for you. Perhaps I'll be here one day a week in this lockup situation. But I want to be honest, and when I'm here to listen and to care for you. Who do I talk to? Who do you talk to? Father George and I were saying before this presentation that we can't talk enough about this, that the vicarious trauma literally gets into the cells of our bodies through the mirror neurons and what I see and what I experience. We really take on the symptomology of developmental and complex trauma. That's why we have to care for ourselves. We need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. We need to be so conscious about what we put into our mouths, or into our eyes. We need to exercise regularly and to nourish ourselves. When I debrief with our intervention teams on Mondays and Tuesdays, usually as we process, how did you care for yourself this weekend? It's usually I binge watched Netflix or I drank bourbon all weekend long. And I don't believe that that is recreation. But how can we take care of ourselves in the midst of confronting so much darkness in the world and in the mission that we've accepted? Look at this. If we could live this. I was recently told of an African tribe that does the most beautiful thing. When someone does something hurtful or wrong, they take the person to the center of town, and the entire tribe comes and surrounds him or her. For 2 days, they'll tell the person every good thing that they have ever done. The tribe believes that a human person comes into the world as good, each of us desiring safety and love and peace and happiness. But sometimes in the pursuit of those things, people make mistakes. The community sees misdeeds as a cry for help. They band together for the sake of their fellow sister or brother to hold them up, to reconnect them with their true nature, to remind him or her that they really are, until they fully remember the truth from which they had temporarily been disconnected, that I am good. Isn't this the idea of a Christian community? Though we don't even know one another in our churches, I believe the power that you have is to facilitate community. As you probably know, there's more community in lockup than there is on our streets. that's transformative. Father George, I might be going too long. Maybe I could stop here.
You're doing fine. There was one question that you touched on, but I thought maybe you might expand a little bit. And that is how, when you're working with someone who's incarcerated and they don't want to talk, how do you allow them to verbalize their experiences without sort of forcing it out of them?
Well, first of all, I believe that our encounters as ministers should be voluntary on their part. That we have a real challenge when probation and the courts and DCFS sends clients to be fixed, from their point of view. But as we know, we don't fix anyone. In the relationship, we believe there can be healing. But I follow the pace of another person. And even if a young African-American is sent to me by probation, I'll be very aware of the cultural diversity. But I am white and I am older, and there's all sorts of projections and transferences going on there. And I'll just invite them, you don't have to be here, but if you'd like to be, I'm here for you. And that's one of my last slides, Father George, is what do we do with the anxiety of silence? Perhaps the person just wants to be with you. I just want to be here in your presence. That usually for the younger ones, I provide crayons and pieces of paper, but I allow another person to do whatever they need to do in that time, as long as they're not hurting themselves or not hurting me. So just holding the silence, there must be a reason why they came. And after a few minutes, I might say, like I'm going to talk about this in a minute if we have time to explore everything, to be inquisitive, is I wonder what's happening inside right now. I wonder how you're feeling. How are you feeling here in this office or in this room, or how are you feeling being present with me? And just those very gentle invitations. That's why I love group work, is because if somebody is silent and doesn't have the words, alexithymia, inability to put words to feelings, somebody's going to be vocal. And it usually triggers other people to go, oh yeah, I feel that way too. So Father George, I don't have a real answer to that, but I do believe in the relationship that we're creating a sacred space, if the other person accepts being a part of it. But I also believe in check-ins, that we don't have to go a long time. What if we just spend about 5 minutes? How are you feeling? How are you feeling about being here in this place? What are some of the stressors? I want to be inquisitive. It's not about me. And those are some of the questions that I have towards the end. If we don't get to it, they'll be on the slides. Is that okay, George?
That's good. Yes, thank you. And we certainly have plenty of time if you wanted to delve more into that area.
All right. I wanted to show you this. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but in many of our works where we're funded by outside sources, that the pressure is the data collection. And I don't know if in your institutions you need to do that, but so much of data collection is not about experiences. It's quantitative, meaning how many Bibles did you give out? How many people did you see this week? How much time did you spend? But I've had a proclivity to create some, and this is based on good evidence in psychology, emotional criteria for qualitative measurement of healing. So I want to just mention these things as maybe for your own toolboxes to have in the back of your mind. Again, I won't explain them because there's not enough time, but I certainly will be available by internet. Increase in impulse control, that I'm a little bit more calm on the inside. An internal versus external locus of control, meaning I don't give my power away to you. What are you looking at? So I have to hurt you and kill you. But I'm more controlled by my own calmness on the inside. These are measures for what's happening in the relationship over time. Increased affect regulation. I'm angry, but I'm talking it out rather than acting it out. I'm lonely, so I'm not dousing myself with bourbon. A decrease in alexithymia, increased capacity and an ease with naming my feelings. A reduction in emotional reactivity. I preach this on Sundays, to tell you the truth. I said, if I manifest any emotional reactivity, if I yell, if I scream, if I do something that is out of a place of calm, then it usually is a sign, not about the other person, but there's some area in my own life that needs attention. There's an area of me that's been traumatized that needs to be explored in the presence of another. A shift in dissociative states, becoming more conscious. I'm very aware when I'm saying Mass, I'm not doing happy hour with my friends. Cognitive functioning, increased regulation and attention. Information, focus, completing tasks. The self-concept, I'm less fragmented and disconnected. I'm more in touch with my history. I can talk about my dad without wanting to kill all men. And with our gang and fellows, I call it the father wound. That so many of our people and those that we serve don't have real positive experience of father or mother. Decreased in symptoms of depression and anxiety. Decreased in substance use. I'll measure that over time in therapy with people, or even in the pastoral relationship. Like, I noticed that you don't talk about the darkness as much. I noticed that you haven't talked about your use of crystal meth. What's happening inside? Just exploring those areas. A reduction in compulsive behaviors. Why did I eat the whole cake and not just a piece? Social context. I think this is so important with us as ministers. Equality of duration. Does an inmate want to come and see me regularly? There's something happening. You've got something that is allowing them to be healed in family and work, in the social and case management, in therapy and ministry. A capacity for solitude. I can be alone in the midst of the screams in a unit without outside stimuli. So some principles that I find are helpful. If anybody has anything to say, again, setting the frame, defining what this relationship is about. I'll be here every week for about an hour. And if you'd like, I'm a priest, and so everything is confidential, except these are some of the limitations to confidentiality. I won't talk to anybody else about what you talk. That's setting the frame, creating spaces. The intrapsychic means what's happening on the inside with my perceptions and my feelings. What's happening in there? That's called the intrapsychic. And then what's happening in the interpersonal? They're both interconnected. There's really a dance going on between what's happening inside of me and outside of me. And so I've really come to believe what's ever happening out there, it's happening in here. And vice versa. We're facilitating a space to remember all the dismembered parts of a person's life. And we are dismembered as a family, as a community in our cultures today. And we're being invited to witness to the pain without having the answer. To notice the emotional reactivity. So emotional reactivity is dissipated through observation. In the mystical traditions, it's called being the mind's witness or the ego observer, simply dissociating intentionally and watching myself from a distance or watching the interaction with other people. There's real power in that because I'm not so emotionally charged by what I'm seeing in myself or another. And I really believe it's a part of a contemplative stance towards the world and towards myself. What's the Lord doing inside of me? And I can really notice that, and even to measure it, that I'm calmer, I'm at peace. I loved COVID for this reason. It was able to calm the craziness of these neighborhoods for a while, and even of our church. With so much activism, we're able to stop for a moment and reflect about what we do and who we are. I won't have time for the transferences, but you're being projected on all the time, and so am I. And we do it with one another. I see Father George there. I'm projecting on this guy. He seems like such a gentle and kind and loving man, and who spent so many years in San Quentin. And so I'm projecting parts of me onto him also, because I have those aspects also. The countertransference is how do I react to people dumping their stuff onto me? And simply being aware of that, we can use it. The invitation is to be open and active and present. It's affect over content. So the courts, the police, the authorities want to know, what did you do? What happened? I want the facts. But biblical times weren't as concerned about the facts. They were more concerned about the experience, right? From the lens of John, which is different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In therapy, but I also believe in ministry, if we focused on the emotion, I don't need to know what happened this week. So what'd you do this week? I'd rather discover, how did you feel this week? What was happening on the inside? And 1,000% of the time, I get the content, although I don't really need it, because I'm not law enforcement, and I'm not a lawyer or a prosecutor. It's exploring another's emotional world to help them identify, express, experience, embrace, and tolerate, communicate feelings. So the goal here isn't to get rid of anxiety and depression. The real therapeutic or ministerial goal is to listen as people identify and express their emotions, their experiences. They learn to tolerate the anxiety, depression, the loneliness, and that can be transformative. This will facilitate a reduction of the emotional reactivity and provide a person with a flexible response. Just naming the emotion, they're so important to do that. So I'm not controlled by them. The more intense the emotional state of a person, the less choice that they have. So in the relationship, I just want to be calm myself. If somebody's reacting, I'm not going to react to the reaction, but rather, you're safe here. I'm going to listen to you. No one is going to hurt you at this moment. It's called affect regulation, calming the spirit, calming the emotions in the relationship with you and me. This is a powerful principle that I believe is helpful. The past is being repeated and re-experienced in the present. That's a trauma principle. So when I see someone, I don't need to go back and go, remember what we talked about last week? What I want to do is to listen, how are you feeling today? And then what we'll notice is certain patterns emerge. We'll see that together. We don't really need to do that as ministers. In therapy either do I need to do it. My goal is to allow a person to awaken, to be more conscious of their life's experience, usually through their pain. It was Freud who used this language at first. He called it the repetition compulsion, that we repeat the past in the present. So I believe it's God's gift to us. Don't we all have certain patterns that we repeat? Don't we all have something that just is our nemesis? Well, I hear this in confession all the time. Oh, Father, it's the same stuff, which I don't remember because it's the gift to Father George and myself that we don't remember confessions. But I believe it's God's invitation to allow us to shine light on the darkness, to see it again, to revisit the pain, which is emerging in the compulsive behavior. And as Richard Rohr, who was my spiritual guide for many years, he said, be careful, Stan, because bright lights cast dark shadows. And we should probably be aware of that ourselves, that I believe we are intentionally light to one another. We also have a dark shadow that we bring. Be aware of our feelings, our emotions, to allow another to feel understood and to realize that I'll never understand. My dad was shot when he was in Vietnam. I'll never understand what it was like for your dad to be shot. My whole set of circumstances, perhaps we have different community support. We have different notions of faith. So I don't ever say I understand, because our gang of all fellows, they go, you're full of crap. You don't understand. You don't know what I'm going through. And with so many of our intervention workers and case managers, it's frustrating because they have street PhDs and they'll go, I've been where you've been. I know what you're going through. And I try to stop them to go, no, you don't. You might have similar experiences, but they're not yours. So the story about the little girl who came back from school, she was late for dinner and mother was livid. She said, I told you to come right home. Where have you been? The little girl said, Mom, I couldn't come right home. My little girlfriend's doll came out of her arms and it fell and broke to pieces. The mother said, you couldn't put that doll back together. Where have you been? She said, I couldn't put the doll back together, Mom, but I sat down on the curb with her and I helped her to cry. I believe it's grandiose for us to believe that we're going to change the system that we're serving in, but I believe we chip away at it like that artist with the lion. But I do believe in the power of simply in solidarity of allowing another to cry without taking away their pain. So in group, we always put a Kleenex in the middle of the circle. And I notice with our intervention workers, they have this proclivity to want to take away each other's pain. If somebody starts crying, somebody will run right over, and put their arms around them. Well, what if that person was abused as an infant or a child? What is that touch going to mean for them? So we call it the rescue fantasy. And I think it's a trap for all of us in ministry, that we want to rescue other people from their pain. And it really robs them of their pain, because that might be where they meet Jesus on the cross. So that on the other side, there might be hope and resurrection. That I really believe that it's not helpful to switch topics, that I'm not in charge here. What do you want me to know through your behavior, through your words? I don't give my opinions or interpretations. And that's really hard for us, because many of us want to moralize stuff. I'm not going to moralize your pain that has been exhibited in perhaps violent or unsafe practices, but I want to listen to it. And I want to be inquisitive about it. Explore, inquisitive, interested in your experience. What's emerging in the relationship? It's experience-based. I am privileged to come to know the shallow world of your life. And I feel that all day long. I think confusion is okay. I don't try to give people the answer to their pain, and I'm confused most of the time anyway, but it's a place of learning and humility. I believe that asking why doesn't help. Why did you do that? Well, if I knew why I did it, I wouldn't have done it. So what's an alternative to why? Rather, tell me more about that. It really is an invitation to exploration rather than, I want the answer. Who am I to get the answer from you? I just want to get to know you. We're humanizing this stuff. It's the incarnation right before our eyes. It's a process of discovering which has been covered over with layers of defenses. That's why I love therapy and having these clinical skills, is because I've learned to discover with people, not to tell them the moral road that they need to take. If I knew why I did something or felt a certain way, it wouldn't be an issue. So explore it with me. And here we go, Father George. What do you do with silence? Am I uncomfortable? Can I tolerate it? Silence can be a really sacred space. And if it goes for a long time, I might just say very gently, I wonder what's happening inside. Where'd you go? There's a young woman who's now married to her wife, who came to church the other week, and I used to see her 10 years ago in therapy. She would come in, she was sexually abused by a coach when she was 7 years old. She would come in on her phone and she would start texting. Well, I have a principle, if I'm giving you my time, this is your time, and I'm not going to interrupt it. So she would text, and then she would say something really profound. And then she'd go back to texting, and I would do some work on the computer. And then 10 minutes later, she'd say something else very profound. And we explored it. We went on and on like this for many sessions. When I saw her the other week, because I use her as an example a lot, I said, when you were texting with me all those years ago, I wonder what was happening. Was it because you were anxious? And she said, that's exactly what was happening. And what I was able to do is just write some stuff out that I was feeling on the inside, and then I could say it. So I think it's important that we're aware of what we do and how we respond to silence. I might simply say, oh, I noticed that you're really quiet. How are you feeling today? So, Father George?
I think
Get out of here.
yeah, that's a great place to wrap up. I would just maybe ask you one quick question in maybe a minute or two. We're talking about dealing with people who are incarcerated or in some way affected by the criminal justice system, who are traumatized. But as we know, everybody who walks into the prison experiences a form of trauma or vicarious trauma. Any suggestions for working with staff? These principles.
Oh, my experience is that staff are the most traumatized, right? Because they're not getting paid enough. Well, maybe some of them get paid a lot, but in that routine of every day and the roles that they have to play, like folk that are guards, I can't believe how they do that. What I see in social workers is that they get hardened themselves. Mm-hmm. So I am I attempt to be as present to our workers and to staff that are working in this field as I am to clients, because I believe in that interchange of gifts. Perhaps I'm going to awaken in somebody a sense of trust where they could talk to me about their pain.
Yeah, thank you.
How about you, Father George? What do you do?
That's been my experience as well. Just being aware of the fact that we're dealing with human beings across the board, and to not fall into this sort of tribalism or feed into us versus them, but to see everyone in a sense as struggling to find that place of freedom in their lives.
Amen.
On that note, it's time to end, and I have a couple of.
Let me just say this: I believe we gotta not fall into the trap of being triangulated. When somebody's talking about somebody who's a guard or somebody on staff or somebody even in the unit, that we not bite into that, because we can exacerbate the violence in a person's heart. So
absolutely, yes, thank you, and thank you again, Father Stan. The content of your talk today is extremely important. This will be recorded and it will be up on our website soon.
George, I wonder if people could just write in the chat just a word that expresses how they felt during this hour.
Sounds good. Thank you. And while they're doing that, we'll come back to that, but I just want to make a couple announcements. We have two more Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition town hall meetings this month, October 20th and October 27th. October 20th, and then both of them are related to the issue of working with developmentally disabled people who are incarcerated. The October 20th town hall meeting will be at the usual time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And that will be continuing the conversation again about developmentally disabled incarcerated people, focusing on hygiene and human sexuality. The following week is another town hall meeting, but it will be an evening event, which is unusual for our town halls. This one will be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And again, it's dealing with relational development. Both of these town halls will be led by Deacon Larry Sutton. On Tuesday, November 1st, don't forget our big event, Reclaiming Wholeness, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. We're looking forward to this. We had to postpone it because of the schedule of Cardinal Joseph Tobin, but he'll be able to be with us that night. So again, this information is on our website. And finally, in November 9th, we have our November webinar will be my brother Jesuit, Patrick St. John, and he will be speaking on the issue of racism. He's written extensively on it. He's a great speaker. That'll be at, again, 1 p.m. Eastern time, November 9th. So the comments people are sharing have to do with gratitude and peace, appreciation of the message that you had for us, Father Stan. So again, I thank you and all of those who joined us today. Thank you. God bless you. And we'll see you at our next town hall meeting, God willing.
Thank you for your mission. I'm inspired. Thank you.
Thank you.